The sound of monikers filled the trauma bay, the steady beeping of life hanging by a thread. Beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, Dr. Marcus Bell moved like a man possessed, his gloved hands working with precision, urgency, and purpose. A scalpel sliced, a clamp clicked. The room smelled of blood and antiseptic. "Pressure's dropping," a nurse shouted. Marcus didn't flinch. Suction, lap sponge. We're not losing him. The patient, a middle-aged black man, victim of a late-night car accident, had lost too much blood before even reaching Grady Memorial. But Marcus had a reputation for performing miracles. At 32, he was one of the youngest cardiothoracic surgeons in the hospital. Driven, sharp, and unrelenting. And black, in a place where that still meant something. After 17 minutes, the bleeding slowed, then stopped. Marcus stitched the final suture and took a breath. It wasn't victory, just another day of survival. Outside the OR, his mentor, Dr. Elaine Strackford, waited with crossed arms and clinical detachment. "You took initiative again, Dr. Bell." He pulled off his gloves. "And saved a life." She didn't smile. "Protocol exists for a reason." Marcus met her gaze. "And so do instincts." The morning staff meeting felt like suffocation. Rows of white coats, coffee cups, and controlled smiles. Marcus sat in the back, watching as Dr. Colin Havers, head of surgery, recounted metrics and upcoming schedule rotations. His voice was smooth, calculated. Then came the case review. A 26-year-old black woman, chest pain dismissed, sent home with antacids. She died in her sleep 12 hours later. The attending on call, Dr. James Calder, white, late 50s, with decades of clout and a record that people described as untouchable. Marcus shifted in his seat, fury rising beneath his skin. "We believe this was an unfortunate diagnostic error," Havers said. "Dr. Calder has our full support." A lie, neat and practiced. Marcus raised his hand. "Was a cardiac workup done?" Havers hesitated. Dr. Bell. "Was an EKG ordered? A troponin test? Anything?" Silence. A few heads turned. Stratford gave him a slow, warning look. "She was young and black," Marcus said evenly. "Her pain didn't fit their template." "This isn't the forum," Havers cut in. "We'll discuss it privately." But Marcus had already stood. He knew exactly where this was going. The formal complaint went in that afternoon. Concise, professional, documented. 2 days later, he was pulled from surgery. "Administrative leave pending investigation," Stratford told him, handing him a sealed envelope. He stared at it. "For what?" "Creating a hostile work environment," she said quietly. "Allegations of insubordination." Marcus laughed, bitter, disbelieving. "I filed a report. I followed protocol." Stratford didn't argue. She only said, "I told you, the system protects itself." Period. Outside the hospital, the Atlanta heat pressed down like judgment. Marcus stood there, stripped of badge and status, watching the doors he'd walked through every day for 8 years. His dream, his calling, locked from within. He thought of the man he'd saved, the woman they hadn't. He thought of all the silence in those meetings. Condition Black, he remembered, was a hospital code. The worst-case scenario. Total system failure. He looked back at the building and knew the code had already been called. Marcus sat alone in his apartment, blinds drawn. The late afternoon sun slicing through in fractured lines. The walls, once bare by choice, now felt like a verdict. His phone buzzed again. He didn't answer. Texts from residents. What happened? They really pulled you? Are you okay? He deleted each one. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't trust who might be watching. The hospital's silence had spoken volumes. There'd been no official meeting, no call from HR, no support from the very people who had once cheered his success. In place of answers, there was absence, and in the absence, suspicion. Marcus stepped out for the first time in 2 days. Downtown Atlanta bustled as always, streetcars humming, voices rising from patios, kids chasing each other between hydrants and heat waves. But at a coffee shop near Piedmont Park, he met with someone who hadn't ghosted him. Renee Caldwell, investigative journalist. Focus: racial disparities in healthcare. She slid him a manila folder. 3 complaints. Different hospitals. Similar pattern. Black patients. Symptoms minimized. Marcus opened it slowly. ER records, autopsy reports, internal memos. It wasn't just Grady. It was systemic. You came to me before, Renee said, about the biopsy delays. Remember? You were right, and they buried it. He nodded. It's worse now. Then speak again, loudly. He looked at her. You think they'll listen this time? She didn't smile. Not them. But the city might. Back in his apartment, Marcus began compiling data. He accessed old case files, public records, redacted reports. He tracked patterns, ER wait times, misdiagnoses, racial demographics. The deeper he dug, the more grotesque the picture became. Condition Black. Not a patient code, a system code. Late that night, he logged into a secure drive and began uploading files. Renee had set up a contact at a whistleblower legal group. They needed documentation, receipts, proof of the disease beneath the hospital's polished skin. Each file he uploaded felt like peeling back a bandage, exposing rot. At Grady, the silence grew teeth. Dr. Calder remained on duty, smiling, untouched. Havers avoided Marcus's name in every meeting. Stratford issued a cold memo about professionalism and institutional loyalty. And still, no one spoke of the dead woman. No vigil, no policy review, no accountability. Marcus met with former patients. A diabetic man who waited 9 hours for insulin. A black mother whose infant's jaundice was dismissed until it turned critical. Stories, so many stories. And in every one, the same undertone. They didn't believe us. They didn't hear us. They didn't see us. One night, Marcus received an anonymous email. No subject, just a line of text. Check the emergency logs from June 3rd. Bay 5. He followed the trail. What he found stopped him cold. A 17-year-old boy, black, gunshot wound, arrived conscious, chart marked stable. He was left unattended for 48 minutes. By the time a resident checked on him, his vitals had crashed. The boy died. Marcus searched deeper. Bay 5 had been under Dr. Calder's supervision that night. The report said the boy had been non-compliant with triage. Marcus stared at that phrase, then printed it. He met with Renee again, this time at night. In a park, just voices in the dark. "If I publish this," she said, "they'll come after you. Hard. They already have." She took the printouts, read the word non-compliant. "He was dying," Marcus said. "They labeled him difficult instead of critical." "It's not just bias," Renee said. "It's policy. It's culture. It's murder," Marcus said. 2 days later, the article dropped. "Condition Black When Hospitals Fail Black Lives" by Renee Caldwell. It didn't name Marcus directly, but it didn't have to. Whistleblower, insider source, leaked records, patient stories. A 17-year-old left to die. A woman misdiagnosed. A pattern of silence and protection. The city stirred. Media outlets picked it up. Twitter exploded. Hashtags, protest plans, demands for investigations. And at the hospital, the mood shifted. Smiles became whispers. Doors closed quicker. Stratford called him. "We need to speak, urgently." Marcus looked at the phone and didn't answer. He had already spoken, but speaking truth isn't the end. Sometimes it's only the trigger. And Marcus knew the system was wounded, but wounded animals are the most dangerous. It began with a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, but calculated. Marcus opened it to find 2 men in suits. One showed a badge, Internal Review Board, Hospital Division. The other didn't introduce himself at all. "Dr. Bell, we're conducting a compliance audit." "At my apartment. You access patient records from your personal device. That's a potential HIPAA violation." He stepped aside, but said nothing. They entered, scanned the room like it belonged to them. He wasn't surprised. The article had landed hard. It had embarrassed people who were used to being untouchable. Now they were circling wagons. They didn't find anything incriminating, but that wasn't the point. The point was to remind him, we're watching. The next week, his apartment building manager informed him that someone had requested access to his rental history. A day later, his bank account was flagged for unusual activity. Coincidences, maybe, but Marcus had been in the game long enough to know the scent of pressure. Then came a phone call from an old colleague, Dr. Vanessa Liu. "Marcus, they're rewriting your residency evaluations." "What?" "Backdating them, trying to build a case that you've been unstable for years." He laughed, hollow. "Of course. They're scared. That means you hit something real." But fear was a weapon, and the hospital was beginning to sharpen theirs. The protests outside Grady grew. First, dozens, then hundreds. Posters, candles, names. The woman, the boy, more names added each day. People began sharing their own stories under the hashtag #ConditionBlack. The comment sections on the hospital's social media were locked. PR teams scrambled to control the narrative. Dr. Calder went on a local news station. "These allegations are deeply troubling, and I support full transparency." Marcus watched the clip on mute. He knew Calder's version of transparency. Renee received a cease and desist letter. The hospital's lawyers accused her of defamation, reckless journalism, endangering staff. She posted it online with one line: "If this isn't truth, sue me." Donations poured in. So did more stories. A retired nurse wrote, "We were told not to escalate certain cases unless they were media risk patients." We knew what that meant. A former intern admitted they were discouraged from ordering tests that cost more when the insurance was public aid. Whispers turned into a chorus, and the system, it tightened. Marcus received a notice of disciplinary hearing. He would face a panel of hospital-appointed administrators and attorneys. No union, no legal representation allowed inside. The charges: violating patient confidentiality, undermining hospital authority, endangering institutional trust. The real charge: disobedience. He arrived in a suit, sat in a room that smelled like antiseptic and power. Across from him sat Stratford, Havers, and a lawyer who never blinked. "Dr. Bell, your actions have jeopardized the integrity of this institution." The integrity was already gone. I just turned on the lights. They called it misconduct. He called it accountability. They asked why he hadn't gone through internal review. "I did," he said. "You buried it." They dismissed his evidence as unauthorized data gathering. "You mean the truth?" Havers leaned forward. "This hospital has saved lives for over 70 years. Marcus stared at him. "And it's failed too." The verdict came in an email. Indefinite suspension pending review. No hearing date set, no appeal route outlined, just a quiet exile. But Marcus wasn't quiet anymore. He went public. Renee filmed him in silhouette, voice modulated, a confession, a warning, a call to act. Then she released the unedited version. Marcus Bell, surgeon, whistleblower, son of Atlanta. "We're taught to do no harm, but what if the system itself is the harm?" The video went viral overnight, and this time, the silence broke from within. A resident sent Marcus a message. "They're starting to talk. They're scared, but they're talking." A nurse sent a voice memo. "I've seen what you saw. For years, thank you." Even Stratford, stoic and sealed, issued a vague internal memo. Institutional culture must evolve. But Marcus didn't care about statements. He wanted reckoning. Because when a code black is called, you don't write a memo. You fight for the ones still bleeding. Rain fell hard against the city, washing Atlanta in streaks of gray. In the silence of his apartment, Marcus watched the drops trail down the glass, each one a silent reminder that storms didn't always come from the sky. His name was everywhere now, not just in news outlets or hashtags, but in courtrooms, classrooms, clinics. Medical students were quoting him in debates. Protesters carried signs with his silhouette. Parents whispered his name at dinner tables, both in praise and fear. The cost of truth was rising, and Marcus knew the next blow wouldn't be public. It would be clinical, strategic, quiet. A burner phone he kept for secure contact lit up. Unknown number. The voice on the other end was soft, controlled. "Dr. Bell, you don't know me, but I work inside." He tensed. Inside what? Medical administration. Grady. "I can't tell you my name, but I can show you where the bodies are buried." She paused, figuratively, and maybe not. They met 2 nights later, in the back corner of a shuttered clinic near Decatur, one that had once served low-income neighborhoods before budget cuts shut it down. She wore a hoodie, baseball cap low, but her voice carried authority. "I've worked at Grady 10 years. Admin compliance. I saw your file. They've been building a case against you since residency." "Why?" "Because you didn't play the game. You treated everyone equally. That made you a liability." She handed him a flash drive. "It has internal audits, disparity reports, deleted incident logs, all dated, all..." Marcus opened the laptop on site and scanned the contents. An entire patient demographic report, hidden from federal submission. A memo. "Do not elevate Category B complaints unless media exposure risk is assessed." Category B? It listed non-white patients. He looked up, fury flickering in his throat. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I joined this system to heal, and I've spent a decade watching it kill in silence." She turned to leave. "Use it before they burn it all." Renee nearly dropped her coffee when she saw the data. "This isn't a leak, this is an autopsy." She called her legal team. They brought in digital forensics, verified every bite. By morning, they had a new story, bigger, broader. The internal code, how hospitals classify lives. The article hit harder than the first. This wasn't just about bias anymore. It was about policy. Covert, coded, deliberate. The story included excerpts, redacted emails, time-stamped evidence. The fallout was immediate. State lawmakers called the hearings. Civil rights groups demanded federal intervention. A class action suit was filed by families of deceased patients. And Grady Memorial? They went into lockdown mode. Public relations silence, internal chaos. And somewhere beneath it all, panic. Marcus received a visit from someone unexpected. Dr. Stratford. She arrived at his door unannounced. No coat, no umbrella. Just eyes that looked older than they had a month ago. "You shouldn't have exposed the data," she said. "I didn't. The system did. I just opened the wound." She looked around his modest apartment. The piles of case files, the printed articles. "They'll offer you a settlement soon. A gag order. A deal. And if I refuse, they'll try to discredit everything." He tilted his head. "Including you?" She hesitated. "There are more like me, Marcus." People trapped inside, watching. We need a way out that doesn't kill us. He nodded. Then help me build it. A beat passed. She didn't answer with words. She simply walked to his table and sat down. That night, Marcus drafted a proposal. A national review board for racial bias in healthcare systems. Independent, transparent, patient-driven. It was radical, expensive, ambitious. It was necessary. Stratford gave him more data. Old studies, suppressed reports, whistleblower affidavits, and names. Names of doctors who had spoken and vanished from the profession. He read until dawn. The media firestorm grew, but now it had fuel, not just rage, vision. Condition Black was no longer just a code. It was a movement, and Marcus Bell, once silenced, had become its voice. But the system wasn't done yet. The next play would come from deeper shadows, and this time, it wouldn't just aim to silence him. It would try to erase him entirely. Rain fell hard against the city, washing Atlanta in streaks of gray. In the silence of his apartment, Marcus watched the drops trail down the glass, each one a silent reminder that storms didn't always come from the sky. His name was everywhere now, not just in news outlets or hashtags, but in courtrooms, classrooms, clinics. Medical students were quoting him in debates. Protesters carried signs with his silhouette. Parents whispered his name at dinner tables, both in praise and fear. The cost of truth was rising, and Marcus knew the next blow wouldn't be public. It would be clinical, strategic, quiet. A burner phone he kept for secure contact lit up. Unknown number. The voice on the other end was soft, controlled. Dr. Bell, you don't know me, but I work inside. He tensed. Inside what? Medical administration. Grady, I can't tell you my name, but I can show you where the bodies are buried. She paused, figuratively. And maybe not. They met 2 nights later, in the back corner of a shut-in clinic near Decatur, one that had once served low-income neighborhoods before budget cuts shut it down. She wore a hoodie, baseball cap low, but her voice carried authority. I've worked at Grady 10 years, admin compliance. I saw your file. They've been building a case against you since residency. Why? Because you didn't play the game. You treated everyone equally. That made you a liability. She handed him a flash drive. It has internal audits, disparity reports, deleted incident logs, all dated, all real. Marcus opened the laptop on site and scanned the contents. An entire patient demographic report hidden from federal submission. A memo: do not elevate Category B complaints unless media exposure risk is assessed. Category B? It listed non-white patients. He looked up, fury flickering in his throat. Why are you helping me? Because I joined this system to heal, and I've spent a decade watching it kill in silence. She turned to leave. Use it before they burn it all. Renee nearly dropped her coffee when she saw the data. This isn't a leak. This is an autopsy. She called her legal team. They brought in digital forensics, verified every bite. By morning, they had a new story, bigger, broader. The internal code, how hospitals classify lives. The article hit harder than the first. This wasn't just about bias anymore. It was about policy. Covert, coded, deliberate. The story included excerpts, redacted emails, time-stamped evidence. The fallout was immediate. State lawmakers called for hearings. Civil rights groups demanded federal intervention. A class action suit was filed by families of deceased patients. And Grady Memorial, they went into lockdown mode. Public relations silence, internal chaos, and somewhere beneath it all, panic. Marcus received a visit from someone unexpected, Dr. Stratford. She arrived at his door unannounced. No coat, no umbrella. Just eyes that looked older than they had a month ago. "You shouldn't have exposed the data," she said. "I didn't. The system did. I just opened the wound." She looked around his modest apartment, the piles of case files, the printed articles. "They'll offer you a settlement soon, a gag order, a deal. And if I refuse, they'll try to discredit everything." He tilted his head. "Including you?" She hesitated. "There are more like me, Marcus. People trapped inside, watching. We need a way out that doesn't kill us." He nodded. "Then help me build it." A beat passed. She didn't answer with words. She simply walked to his table and sat down. That night, Marcus drafted a proposal. A national review board for racial bias in healthcare systems. Independent, transparent, patient-driven. It was radical, expensive, ambitious. It was necessary. Stratford gave him more data. Old studies, suppressed reports, whistleblower affidavits, and names. Names of doctors who had spoken and vanished from the profession. He read until dawn. The media firestorm grew, but now it had fuel. Not just rage, vision. Condition Black was no longer just a code. It was a movement, and Marcus Bell, once silenced, had become its voice. But the system wasn't done yet. The next play would come from deeper shadows. And this time, it wouldn't just aim to silence him. It would try to erase him entirely. 3 days after the second article went live, Marcus Bell ceased to exist, not in body, but in record. It began with his medical license. A letter from the Georgia Composite Medical Board arrived, citing pending investigation of ethical misconduct. His license was placed on immediate suspension. No prior notice, no explanation, just a line in bold. You are no longer authorized to practice medicine within the state of Georgia. Then came the erasures. His hospital profile vanished. Residency papers disappeared from Emory's internal system. Medical research he'd co-authored was delisted from Grady's academic archive. Even his alumni page from Morehouse mysteriously redirected to a 404 error. They weren't just silencing him. They were unmaking him. Renee stormed into his apartment with her laptop. "They're ghosting your credentials. Systematically. Do you understand what that means?" He nodded, calm, too calm. "They want the next time someone Googles me to say I never existed." "That's not damage control," she said. "That's career assassination. It's legacy erasure." Renee turned her screen toward him. An anonymous email titled, "Next Move." Inside, a single line, "Bell's academic integrity is vulnerable. Begin Phase 2. Attached, fabricated documents, an altered research log, edited timestamps, a planted email suggesting he'd stolen patient data for personal use." Marcus closed the laptop. "They're not just attacking the truth," he said. "They're rewriting it." The smear campaign exploded online. Right-wing blogs picked it up. Fake doctor behind #ConditionBlack exposed. Cable news ran segments filled with alleged disclaimers. A conservative think tank posted a report questioning his mental health, quoting anonymous sources about his unstable behavior and obsession with victimhood. Former colleagues distanced themselves publicly. Privately, they sent messages, "I'm sorry. I have a mortgage." They threatened to pull my credentials too. Even Stratford warned him. "They're building something bigger. If you stay in the spotlight, you won't just lose your license, you'll lose everything." He stared at her. "Then it's worth losing." But not everyone backed away. The insider, the administrator who had given him the flash drive, reached out again. They have a legal firm in DC that specializes in this. They bury threats to hospital networks. They've done it before. She named 3 doctors. All had spoken out against racial policy failures. One now taught high school biology. Another ran a food truck. The third died by suicide. "They want you quiet," she said, "or gone." Marcus didn't blink. Then we go louder. Renee launched a counter-campaign, a video series, Unerasing Dr. Bell. Each clip featured patients, nurses, students, testimonials, receipts, dates, proof. People who were never heard, finally speaking. The hashtag changed from #ConditionBlack to "We Remember Bell." The effect was immediate. The smear campaign didn't vanish, but it fractured, lost ground, faced resistance when the board refused to reverse the license suspension. A coalition of civil rights attorneys filed an injunction. The ACLU released a statement. Medical ethics boards in New York and California offered Marcus limited consulting positions while the case unfolded. He wasn't practicing. In his apartment, he sat across from Stratford again. This time, she looked tired. Not from guilt, from choice. "There's a meeting," she said. "Off books, internal execs, hospital investors. They're planning full damage control. If they pin you as unstable, they'll close this chapter clean." Marcus leaned forward. "Can I get in?" She shook her head. "But I can. And I'll wear a wire." He blinked. "You'd do that?" "You were right. Silence protects status, not lives. I'm done being silent." 1 week later, a private meeting was leaked. Audio files. Executives admitting to targeted discrediting. Legal terms like containment narrative, disruption profile, and legacy neutralization. The clip hit the media like a grenade, and in its wake, real fear. For Marcus, it was vindication. But it wasn't victory, because now he knew they weren't just afraid of him. They were afraid of what might come after him. A new generation. Doctors who would never play by the old rules and wouldn't stop until the system flatlined and was rebuilt from the code up. The courtroom smelled of old wood and tension. The walls were lined with the faded echoes of past battles. Some won, many buried. Marcus Bell sat at the center of it all, his hands folded, face still. Across from him sat lawyers in tailored suits, their eyes sharp with calculation. Cameras weren't allowed, but everyone knew the real trial had already begun. In public, in headlines, in whispers, across every hospital hallway in the country. This was just the formality. A deposition, not a verdict, but the weight of it, pressed like judgment. State your name for the record. Dr. Marcus Elijah Bell. Are you currently a licensed medical practitioner? No. The state suspended my license pending investigation. Do you acknowledge accessing confidential patient records from outside hospital networks? I accessed publicly redacted data and whistleblower-shared files, all under counsel. None were used for personal gain. Did you leak internal documentation to the press? He paused. I revealed systemic malpractice that endangered lives. If that's a leak, I'm guilty. The opposing counsel leaned back. Do you believe your actions were ethical? I believe silence would have been unethical. Outside, protesters held signs. Let Bell work. Patience over profits. Silence kills. The courthouse steps had become a place of pilgrimage. Parents whose children had died of preventable complications. Former nurses who had seen charts altered. Med students who refused to be complicit. Renee live-streamed daily updates. The leak of the Grady executive's audio tapes had gone viral, now cited in state Senate hearings. No one could pretend anymore. In a private break room, Marcus met with his attorney, a calm black woman named Ayanna Pierce, who had taken on systemic cases before and knew the smell of institutional fear. They're going to offer a deal, she said. Let me guess, I get reinstated if I disappear. Exactly. Quiet reinstatement. No lawsuits. No more press. You walk away, they seal the rest. He sipped his water. And the board investigation? Dropped. He shook his head. Too clean. Too convenient, she agreed. But tempting. You could operate again, travel, teach. He looked her in the eye. If I walk away, they win. And the next doctor with a conscience won't even speak. At a town hall in downtown Atlanta, Marcus spoke publicly for the first time since his deposition. Hundreds filled the room. Standing room only. Cameras, reporters, families. They tried to erase me. They failed. But I'm not the story. He pointed to the crowd. You are. Every patient turned away. Every child misdiagnosed. Every nurse told to stand down. This fight is bigger than a hospital. It's about who gets to survive and who's allowed to die quietly. The room erupted, not in rage, in resolve. That night, the video reached 2 million views in under 24 hours. And a ripple began. Medical students at Harvard, Howard, and Johns Hopkins staged walkouts in solidarity. Grady Memorial's board of directors issued a public apology, careful, curated, but the first crack in decades of silence. 1 week later, the Georgia Medical Board reversed Marcus's suspension. Officially, they claimed lack of conclusive evidence. Unofficially, the pressure had become too much. But Marcus didn't return to the OR. He announced the launch of a national initiative. The Equity Directive, a coalition of doctors, lawyers, patients, and ethicists dedicated to dismantling racial bias in healthcare systems. Its mission: transparency, accountability, reform. Its motto: we don't fix the broken, we replace it. That night, Stratford sent him a single message. You did more outside the system than they ever let you do inside it. Marcus stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. Outside, the city lights flickered. Sirens passed in the distance. Condition Black wasn't just a diagnosis anymore. It was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. 6 months later, the air in Atlanta was different. Not cleaner, not quieter, but sharper. Like a city that had finally learned how to breathe truth, no matter how raw. The Equity Directive had grown beyond anything Marcus Bell imagined. What started as a coalition of a few dozen had become a national network. Legal advisors, whistleblowers, data scientists, patient advocates. Regional hubs formed in Chicago, Oakland, Baltimore, and Jackson, each one collecting testimony, building cases, training new doctors in bias recognition and ethical accountability. Marcus traveled constantly now, not as a surgeon, but as a strategist, a witness, a builder, and always still a target. The attacks hadn't stopped. Some came with legal letterheads. Others came as threats. Anonymous messages, late-night knocks, offers of settlement from shadowy intermediaries. One morning, his hotel room in Dallas was broken into. Nothing stolen, just files moved. Laptop open. A single line left on the screen. Cut the directive or bleed. He didn't flinch. He posted the threat and gained 80,000 new followers in 48 hours. But not all pressure came from enemies. Even inside the movement, tension brewed. Some activists accused the directive of being too procedural, too slow. You're trying to fix a system that was built to fail us, one organizer shouted at a town hall in Detroit. Burn it down. Marcus listened, then answered carefully. We don't want smoke. We want air. Burning doesn't heal. It hides. The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon the whole room stood, not in total agreement, but in total clarity. In Washington, hearings had begun. The Senate Subcommittee on Health Equity subpoenaed hospital executives. Testimonies were televised. The leaked Grady audio tapes played on screens above the chamber. Stratford, now retired, testified voluntarily. I saw it, I allowed it, and I stayed silent. That ends today. Her words rocked the chamber. Marcus sat behind her, eyes heavy. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt responsible. But also, finally, not alone. The directive released its first national report, Triage by Color, the hidden algorithm of racial disparity in emergency care. It used 5 years of anonymized patient data from 22 hospitals. Findings: Black patients waited, on average, 28% longer for critical care. Pain reports from Black women were 34% less likely to result in diagnostic imaging. Non-white patients were 60% more likely to be discharged without adequate follow-up instructions. The report ended with a stark line. These numbers are not accidental. They are architectural. Change began to accelerate. Medical boards announced new, mandatory training modules. States proposed transparency laws requiring publication of care disparity metrics. One hospital in Denver created an internal ombudsman office modeled on the directive's principles. Not all were thrilled. Hospital lobbyists pushed back. Lawsuits were filed, but the public tide had turned. Condition Black was now shorthand in the national vocabulary. Code for everything people had once whispered, now shouted aloud. Late one night, Marcus returned to Atlanta. He stood outside Grady Memorial. The lights inside still burned. Doctors still walked the halls. Lives still hung by threads. And yet, it was no longer the same building. Or maybe he was no longer the same man. He walked to the ER doors, paused, then turned away. His work for now was elsewhere. The operating room was broken, but the system, he was finally cutting into that. And this time, he wouldn't suture it shut. He'd leave it open to heal right. Autumn came to Atlanta with the scent of magnolia and unrest. The headlines had changed tone. What once hailed Marcus Bell as a whistleblower hero now questioned the directive's political agenda. Editorials spoke of good intentions gone rogue. Anonymous op-eds from unnamed hospital administrators claimed morale was down, resources stretched, and that the directive's audits were paralyzing care. The movement had shaken the system, and now the system was trying to shake back. Marcus stood on stage at a conference in Chicago. He was no longer alone. Beside him sat doctors from across the country. Black, Latino, Indigenous, Asian, each with their own stories, statistics, and scars. He spoke last. We didn't ask for war. We asked for fairness, for visibility, for the chance to care without having to navigate through the filters of bias. If that threatens your structure, maybe the structure was never about care. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, but backstage, Ayanna handed him a file. Read it, then burn it. Inside, classified memos from a health policy lobbying group, leaked by a sympathetic analyst. Strategy points: discredit directive leaders through media partners, redirect funding from equity initiatives to community outreach firms under corporate control, identify and disqualify research studies authored by directive-affiliated physicians. There was a final bullet point: infiltrate, divide, collapse. That same week, a major news network aired a segment titled, "Weaponizing Compassion. Is the Equity Directive Going Too Far?" It featured cherry-picked footage, angry protests, a staged debate between a directive critic and a neutral medical ethics professor who, as Renee quickly uncovered, had been paid by a hospital lobbying firm. The narrative had shifted, not against injustice, against the idea of fighting it too effectively. Internal tensions spiked. Younger activists wanted faster, louder action. Older members warned of surveillance and traps. Some clinics that had adopted the directive's model reported surprise audits. Others had funding pulled. One hospital in North Carolina fired an entire ethics board after they voted to implement directive recommendations. Still, Marcus urged strategy. Revolutions that last are built, not broadcast. But he knew the more ground they gained, the more ground the old system would try to scorch. In a private meeting in D.C., Marcus met with a senator from Georgia. "They're scared," she said. "Which means you're close." "Close to what?" "Critical mass. Enough pressure to force federal policy. But you won't get there unless you survive this next wave." She passed him a folder. A draft bill. The Patient Equity Act. Federal audits. Funding linked to disparity metrics. Protected channels for medical whistleblowers. It was ambitious, and it would make enemies. Marcus signed the cover page. Let's introduce it. That night, an arson fire hit the directive's outreach office in Baton Rouge. No injuries, but the message was clear. There would be no reform without retaliation. Marcus stood amid the ashes the next day, his voice calm but steel beneath. "Burning down buildings won't stop this, because we stopped building movements out of brick. We built this one out of people." Behind him, a young volunteer began passing out flyers. A new clinic was opening in a borrowed church basement. The flame they'd tried to snuff had only spread. In every city, Condition Black was no longer a whisper. It was a signal. The system was pushing back. But this time, so was the future. And it was louder than fear. The Senate chamber was colder than Marcus expected. He sat behind the lead sponsor of the Patient Equity Act as final testimony was delivered. Lawyers, physicians, families. Some stories choked the room. Others electrified it. Each one marked the same line in different words. "We were harmed. We were silenced. We will not be again." When Marcus stood to speak, the room leaned in. "We are not asking for miracles. We're asking for measurement, for accountability, for fairness that isn't contingent on skin color or zip code. This bill doesn't fix everything, but it builds the floor we stop falling through." When he sat down, even his enemies couldn't meet his eyes. The bill passed committee by a single vote. It was the first federal legislation of its kind, and it wasn't law. Not yet. Outside, protesters stood in cold rain. Hashtag Condition Black signs flapped in the wind, soaked but unshaken. A mother handed Marcus a note, scrawled in pen. "My son died because they said he was exaggerating. You made him real again." He folded it into his pocket. Some truths didn't need a podium, just a witness. Meanwhile, the sabotage escalated. Hospitals that adopted the directive model were hit with insurance retractions. A high-profile physician who supported the directive was arrested on charges that later vanished in court. But not in media. Renee's email was hacked. Her home address leaked. Her car slashed. She didn't stop publishing. They want fear to feel bigger than truth, she told Marcus. We just have to keep truth louder. So they did. Public town halls, youth forums, coalition building with immigration clinics, LGBTQ health orgs, native health networks. The movement evolved. It didn't just resist now. It reimagined. At home, Marcus found sleep harder. He kept folders of letters, survivors, whistleblowers, students, names he could never say aloud. Some had fled jobs, others fled cities. He read each one and wrote back. He knew now, leadership wasn't about standing tallest. It was about answering first, even when no one saw you do it. The Patient Equity Act reached the Senate floor. Lobbyists spent millions trying to stop it. One night before the vote, a hospital CEO called Marcus directly. Voice flat. You win this. You won't be able to walk into a hospital again. No one will hire you. No one will insure you. Marcus replied, then build better hospitals. He hung up and didn't flinch. On the day of the vote, the chamber was packed. Journalists, activists, skeptics. Marcus stood in the gallery, eyes fixed on the board. The numbers ticked. 49, yes. 49, no. One abstained. The vice president stepped in. One more vote. The screen flashed. Yes. 51. The chamber erupted. Marcus didn't cheer. He exhaled. He closed his eyes and remembered every name they'd lost before this moment. Every voice buried under protocol. Every body denied dignity. This wasn't justice, but it was the beginning of one. That night, he returned to the Atlanta clinic where it all began. The lights flickered. A child laughed in the next room. A young intern approached him. Black, 24, white coat still creased from its package. Dr. Bell, I read your story. I almost left med school. Thought it wasn't worth it. But now I want to stay. I want to fight. Marcus smiled. Then don't fight like me. How then? Fight smarter, safer, with allies. Fight to heal, not just to hurt what hurt us. The intern nodded and left. Marcus stood alone. The bill had passed, but the system hadn't. Yet, 1 year later, the wall inside the National Office of the Equity Directive bore names. Thousands. Painted by hand. Patients, families, survivors, doctors, nurses. Names once lost to files, now inked in permanence. A living ledger of those who had suffered and those who had stood up. At the center was a simple quote in black lettering. We do not repair systems. We replace them with something just. Under it, Marcus Bell sat alone, reviewing the newest rollout. Directive-certified hospitals, updated reporting protocols, med schools integrating anti-bias simulation labs. Progress, yes, but not peace. Peace didn't exist in a system still grieving itself. Every win came with a new challenge. Some states adopted the directive willingly. Others passed laws banning its training programs. In one southern state, lawmakers labeled the Patient Equity Act federal overreach and threatened to defund hospitals that complied. Marcus responded with silence. And then, data. Within months, ER retention improved in directive hospitals. Misdiagnosis rates dropped. Community trust surveys rose. Lawsuits declined. The numbers said what arguments couldn't. On the anniversary of the bill's passage, Marcus was asked to give the keynote at the National Medical Ethics Summit. He declined. Instead, he asked a young doctor, the same intern from Atlanta, to speak. She stood on that stage in a white coat that now bore her name. "I'm not here because someone handed me a platform," she said. "I'm here because someone refused to step down from theirs until we could stand too." She told her story. She told his story. She told the truth. And when she finished, the room didn't clap. They stood and they listened. Later that evening, Marcus walked alone through the halls of Grady Memorial. He wasn't a staff member anymore. He wasn't even recognized at first, but he moved through those corridors with the calm of a man who'd been to war and returned, not to reclaim territory, but to witness change. He passed an exam room where a resident was speaking Spanish to a patient. Another room where a nurse was explaining care options in plain, clear language. He smiled, faintly. Not because the work was done, but because it had finally begun. Outside, a girl waited near the entrance, 17 maybe, holding a binder, a nervous smile. "Dr. Bell, I read about you. I want to be you." He shook his head gently. "No," he said. "Be better." She laughed, uncertain. "How?" He thought about it. "Tell the truth, even when no one's listening, especially then. And when they come for you, and they will, don't fight alone. Build, share, raise others. That's how you win." She nodded, scribbled something in her binder. "Will you sign it?" He did. Not as a hero, not as a martyr, not even as a doctor, just as a man who knew the cost of silence and chose, again and again, to speak. Condition Black wasn't just a code anymore. It was a language, a signal, a movement, and now, finally, a cure in progress.